Was that a chicken?
So,
Did you hear a chicken?
I heard chicken.
Oh, hey guys, how you doing? Welcome to fishing. And I know a lot of y'all, more than likely, if you've been to camp before, you've been fishing. Some of y'all maybe have never been fishing before, maybe want to go. We're going to try to set this up for you guys as if you're wanting to go fishing for the first time. Baits to pick, the type of rod and reel to use. Going to be kind of basic, but we're going to make it a lot of fun. And we have, I guess, maybe 3, possibly 4 different things we're going to cover today, depending on time. First, DJ's going to talk to you guys about rods and reels. Those of y'all that went through the virtual camp classes, watched the videos, you know that we already covered how to cast with a spin casting rod. We didn't talk about the other 2 that we showed, so we're going to demonstrate those. We're going to also talk about the baits you want to pick when you go fishing, from starting from scratch, what you want to build in your tackle box. We're going to try to catch some fish, show you how to take them off the hook, talk about a few cool things about them, different stuff like that. And of course, we're going to answer any questions you guys have. So that's kind of the rundown of what we're going to do today. And any questions y'all got, we'll ask you for those at the appropriate time. First, we're going to go over to DJ. He will talk to you guys about rods and reels. And then we're going to talk about the baits you're going to want to pick. All right.
All right. So, yes, I think it was a chicken. Anyways, so as he said, we've already talked to you about the first rod you probably ever use in your life. You can get these basically any sporting goods store, any big box store is going to have your typical closed-faced reel. All right. If you come to any of our camps, this is the one you're going to be using. It's a great way to get people started in the sport of fishing. It's pretty simple. Got a little button, releases the line, reel to reel it in. Not much to these. You've watched our programs before. You know how to cast these already. But great starting out. They're strong enough, these rods are, to handle a bass. They can handle your small panfish and even some catfish when you get a little bigger ones, right? But today we're going to make this a little more advanced, okay? So maybe you're moving up out of this, or maybe you're starting out for the first time, but you don't want to start off with this. So the next step up, usually for most people, is going to be some kind of spinning reel, spinning rod combo. On a spin rod, it makes it a little different because the reel is actually on the bottom. Now, there's a famous commercial that has somebody that's using it like this, all right? This is not what we do with these spinning rods. These spin rods are made to go on the bottom, all right? They're usually a lot more sensitive than your one you started off with. The line's usually going to be thinner. These are for panfish, for crappie, and sometimes the little bigger ones are made for bass. But you'll notice these eyes are a little different too. On our typical closed face or spin cast reel, they're on top, they're smaller. These are made to cast just a little further, made for more sensitive line, and these bigger eyes allow that line to slide through there a lot faster. All right, so when using one of these, I'll release your bait, and then you're going to reel up till whatever your weight is just about 4 or 5 inches underneath the rod tip. Then you're going to take your finger, just your trigger finger, like you're shooting a gun. You're going to close that line to the reel. I'll flip this thing right here called a bell. And now if I release, yeah, that line's going to fall. Okay, it's going to fall, and my bobber's going to drop. So what we'll do is we'll have the same casting motion as the spin cast that you've used before. We're going to go back to 2 o'clock. And then when we go forward, we're going to release our trigger finger at this 11 o'clock position. So when you do it correctly, back to 2, my hand's a clock. This is the 2 o'clock position. And then forward, release at 11. It's a nice, easy cast. Make sure you close the bell before you start reeling up. With these, you'll get a lot of line twist if you don't do that. If you use things like rooster tails, which Country will probably talk about in a little bit, they'll cause that line to twist up on you as it's reeling in. So if you close that bell right before that weight hits the water, it's going to cause that line to not twist up as bad. All right, you reel whatever it is up. And it's pretty simple. Not much to these spin reels. If you want to skip the step of having a spin cast, you can move right up in, and this could be your first one you learn to use. Now you'll notice though, this rod handle, this reel handle, is right here on my right. Well, I usually don't like doing that. I don't like reeling with my right hand. I feel like if I'm going to set the hook on a fish, I want it to be my most powerful arm. So if you do unscrew this, you can take this reel handle off and you can put it on the other side. So this reel is made for left or right-handed fishermen. You can use either one. One step above this is our bait casting or open face reel. Now these are the ones you see all the professional fishermen using. When you watch Bassmasters on TV, this is the one they're predominantly using. It's made to cast bigger baits, so you'll notice that this is a lot bigger than what we have been using. If I can get it untwisted for a second. So I got it untwisted. I'm gonna reel up just like we were for the spin rod. But again, this reel is made to go on top. It's got the small little eyelets that help control your casting a little better than say maybe your spinning rods would. But the key thing to this is it's probably not the one you want to start out with, because you do have to have some thumb control to cast this. If you do it just right, when you cast, you'll push this button now, it'll click. You'll keep your thumb on the spool itself, pull back to 2, release at 11, 10 o'clock, just like you would in a normal cast. The only difference with this is this spool is going to free spin. It's going to free spin, and you're going to have your thumb right on that line, not too much pressure because it'll stop it and you won't cast very far. But if I do not put my thumb on here at all, what's going to happen is what we call a backlash, or we're going to get what we call a bird's nest, all right? This line's going to go fluttering everywhere, and you're going to end up having to cut a bunch of line off. So we don't recommend you start off fishing with one of these. Start off with a spin cast or a spinning reel. Get used to that, and then slowly work your way up on these. On these bait casting rods, they've got magnets on them to help control the speed of that spool. They've also got this thing right here. It's called a brake. That brake, just the same as the brake on your car. You tighten up the brake, it stops a lot faster. You back off on it, it makes that spool spin a lot faster. So this is kind of helping you and helping you with your thumb. So if I pull this brake all the way back, watch my lure, it'll go down really, really fast when I let go. If I tighten this brake up a little bit, it won't go near as fast. All right, so we want it to move a little bit, but not too much. So you can adjust back and forth. Just get used to the feel of it. When I do go to cast and release my thumb, I want to slowly apply pressure back on. And when that bait hits the water, I want it to be all the way down. Don't want that spool continuing to spin, because that's when we get that bird nest. But here's what we'll do. I'll cast it one time. Keep the pressure on there. We push the button down. So if I release my thumb, it's going to fall straight down. Keep holding it. Pull back to 2. When you get to about 10, 11 o'clock, you release and slowly let this go. So it should look like this when you do it. And slowly put your thumb back on there. Notice we don't have a big bird's nest. And then you can slowly reel it. So that's the 3 major different reels that we've got. The rods themselves, the spinning rod, it's going to be really, really whippy, okay? It's made for sensitivity. Get a lot of feel. If you get a really, really small fish, all right, a little bluegill, you're going to be able to feel them on this rod. You may not be able to feel them. Stay. You may not be able to feel them as much on this big, heavy rod. But this big, heavy rod is going to also allow you to land bigger fish a lot faster. All right, so those are the 3 basics. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to send you over to Country. He's going to show you some things that you might want in your first tackle box. You're starting to get into pan fishing and bass fishing and maybe even catfishing. He's going to show you some things to use for those particular species. Getting started. All right, to you, Country.
Okay, we're going to talk about the different baits you're going to want to pick for different types of fish that you plan on catching. DJ just demonstrated you guys the spinning rod and reel, and he showed you kind of a bluegill setup. Bluegill small fish. We're going to try to catch one here in a second, kind of break that fish down for you and kind of show you the parts of it. Since we can't predict when we're going to catch a fish, if he catches one in the next couple of minutes, we'll just go over to him, then you'll come back to me. So what I want to do is kind of talk about, setting up your tackle box for catching a bass. Bass are by far the most sought after sport fish in the state of Kentucky. Bluegill, your panfish, your crappie, bluegill, things like that, a lot of fun to catch. But more people are going to the lakes primarily to catch your largemouth bass, your smallmouth bass, your spotted bass, than really any other fish. A lot of fun to catch, fairly easy to catch, put up a good fight, and generally when you catch your first one, not only is the fish hooked, but you are as well. And then say goodbye to the money for the rest of your life, because you know where it's going to be going, straight to fishing tackle. With fishing equipment, you can spend as much as you want to spend, or you can keep it simple. I like to fish one way, so I'm going to use only this bait. That's up to you. But you can't just take one bait year-round and be successful with it. The water changes temperature. Sometimes it rains. That water's going to get dirty. Sometimes the water's clear. So you got to adapt your presentation to what you plan on catching. So if I'm going to set up my first tackle box, what I plan on catching, if I'm going to go bass fishing, I want to think about the area that I'm in. Some of you might be in far eastern Kentucky. Over there, you have really deep, clear water. Western Kentucky, we're a pretty flat part of the state. Our lakes, things like that, aren't as deep. Sometimes they stay a little bit muddier because we have a lot of rivers and stuff draining the areas and a lot of silt on the bottom. So I can't sometimes use the same things here and be successful that I could use in eastern Kentucky. So you got to think about the area you're in, and you got to think about the color of your water. You also got to think about the temperature of your water. When you think about us, I'm a big boy. I don't get big and beautiful just staring at the sun all day. I eat a lot of food. And when you eat a lot of food, you see what happens to me. However, fish are kind of the same way as us, except they're cold-blooded. A cold-blooded fish, its body is going to be the same temperature as the surroundings around it. I'm always the same temperature. And since I'm always the same temperature, my body's always burning energy at the same rate. So to replace that energy, I have to eat. Depending on how warm that water is, could be how hungry that fish is going to be at that given moment. The warmer the water, the more the fish that is going to need to eat in order to replace the energy it's burning. So you're going to have to probably fish a little bit faster, something like that, whatever. Now, if I just got distracted, DJ just caught a fish and he threw it back in. What are you doing? Was it not pretty enough? Anyway, if you're fishing in cold water, that fish is going to be a little bit more lethargic. You guys go outside, and I like to say you get the snowball fingers. They get real stiff, and you're like, ah. Well, that's how that fish is going to feel in cold water. It's not going to want to eat as much if it feels like snowball fingers. So you got to understand the conditions you're in. So depending on the conditions you're in, when you plan on fishing, the temperature of the water, you also got to think about the clarity of the water. How clear is that water? The muddier the water, you're going to have to pick a different bait. The clearer the water, you're going to have to pick a different bait. So we're going to kind of go through that because some of y'all in the different part of the state, you have different water than what you find here in Western Kentucky. So I want to kind of give you a couple of different scenarios to pick from. Bass and pretty much any other fish, like we said, they got to eat. And if they're going to eat, there's really two different things you're going to be eating in the water. You're going to be eating stuff you find on the bottom, or you find stuff swimming in the surface of the water or just below the surface of the water. Bass primarily are eating fish or crayfish. And crayfish are usually down on the bottom. You usually find them around rocks. And a crawdad crayfish is generally going to be the same color as the rocks and the surroundings that it is in. If you are fishing in eastern Kentucky, super clear water, well, you're going to want to make sure you have something that looks more natural. A natural color is going to be something kind of looking like this. This is just kind of a bland green looking color. Well, you got to think about that water. If you have really clear water, that water's going to get sunlight. And what grows when you have water and sun? Well, you get plants growing. And on rocks, you usually get algae. And that algae is going to be a green color. Well, those crawfish are going to try to look a lot like their surroundings. So you're going to try to make your bait look like the surroundings that it's in. So if I'm in eastern Kentucky and I'm fishing deep, clear water, I want to make sure I look at my surroundings and I start to pick baits that are kind of colored like those surroundings. The muddier the water is, and you look at this water out here, it's pretty gross looking, it's pretty brown. This might not be the right color you want to use. You might want to use something that's a little bit brighter. This brighter color is going to stand out more, and that fish can see it from a longer distance away. Fish see colors just like we do. And if you are trying to catch that fish, you got to give it something it can see, but you got to make it look natural. You can get away with crazier colors in dirty water. In that clearer water, you kind of have something, like I said, that's a little bit more natural. So if I'm going to pick baits, I'm going to think about the area I'm going to be fishing in. I'm going to be thinking about what I'm trying to catch. And if I'm going to try to catch a bass, I want something that bass is going to want to eat. It's going to be a fish, or it's primarily going to be a crayfish. Think about the color of the water. So up first, if I were you and I was starting from scratch to go fishing, generally if you're starting from scratch fishing, you're going to be fishing from the bank. If you are fishing from the bank, you're casting out. And let's say you cast out 20 feet, you start reeling, you get hung up. Are you getting that bait back? Probably not. So I'm not going to be going out and buying those $8, $9, $10, $12 lures. I'm going to get something a little bit cheaper because you're probably going to lose a lot of baits if you're fishing from the bank. You also want to think about the type of hooks that's on that bait, and I'll talk about those here in a second. The fewer hooks you have, the less likely you are probably going to get hung up, and that's kind of what you're trying to do if you're fishing from the bank. So when you talk about a fish imitating bait, something that I would tell every person that I meet, they say, what is the one bait I need to buy to fish with to catch fish in my area? I'm going to tell them just get a spinnerbait. And you can get different types of spinnerbaits. This one is called an inline spinner because that blade is in line with the bait. And it's going to rotate around that body of that bait as you reel it in. All you got to do with these is cast them out and reel them in. So if you are a beginning fisherman, you're going to cast it out, you're going to reel it in. That's as easy as it gets. So I would start with a spinnerbait. It mimics another fish. You also have called tandem spinnerbaits. You have different blades. These blades are going to do different things. You can get as technical as the color of the blades. We're not going to do that today. But if I'm in Eastern Kentucky and I'm going to be fishing that clear water, I don't want to use a really big blade. The bigger the blade, the more vibration that is going to put into the water. And the more vibration that's in the water, the more likely that fish is to sense that bait. Well, if you got clear water, that fish can see a long way. And if it can see a long way, you don't need to put a bunch of thump out there in the water because that's not going to be natural to that fish. So you want to get something that's got a little bit smaller blade and looks a little bit more natural, and that fish can see. This color is called white and chartreuse. You get your bright greens and your white. White is a very natural color. A lot of your bait fish are going to have a white tint to them. So I would get something white. And then, like I said, the color of the blades, up to you what you want to get there. You also have a different blade. This is just a big round blade called a Colorado blade. These put off a lot of thump. So if I'm fishing in really dirty water, like you see here, if I have a real small blade because I'm wanting to fish in Eastern Kentucky, and I bring that over here and fishing in this dirty water, that fish might not be able to see that bait because the water's dirtier, and it might not be able to feel it because you're not putting off as much thump. Well, now you want to give it something that's going to be able to see darker colors or brighter colors, and a bigger blade, more thump. That fish can find it easier, and the closer it gets, the easier it's going to be to see. So you kind of have to break it down as to what you plan on catching and then adapting that bait to that situation you're in. Deep, cold, clear water, you don't want to use some baits you're going to use in really, really mud water. Next, if I'm going to try to catch a fish from the bank, I wouldn't recommend doing this, but sometimes it'll work, especially if you're fishing in a pond. You don't have a lot of rocks or a lot of snags. If you're fishing out at, down at the dam, there's a bunch of riprap on the bank, and you're dragging the bait across riprap, you're going to lose a lot if you're fishing from the bank. But a lot of fish like to eat crawfish, and this is a crawfish imitating bait. It's called a jig. This is the jig head, and the hook is built into it. This is what is called the weed guard. Just because that's on there doesn't mean you're not going to get hung up. You're still going to get hung up, but you're dragging this across the bottom. That's where that crawfish is spending its time. If I'm in Eastern Kentucky, deep, clear water, I want to use something that's going to blend in with the surroundings. You want to use something that looks natural, kind of like that. Over here in Western Kentucky, where water's a little bit muddier now, a darker brown color, a darker green color, something that's going to be easier for that fish to see might work. Some of those nice little sparkles in there make it easier for that fish to see. Another thing you want to take into consideration is on these baits, you see two different looking tails there, the pinchers on the fish. If I drug that through the water, these are going to kick and flap like crazy and put off a lot of vibration. If I drug that through the water, it's not going to put off any. Sometimes it can be as critical as that. What are those pinchers doing in the water as you drag the bait? Another thing you have to consider is the hooks you want to use. Obviously, to catch that fish, you got to hook at the mouth. And if I'm fishing on the bottom, you're going to need to get that bait down to the bottom with your sinkers. These are called bullet sinkers. They look like bullets. The bigger these sinkers are, generally the more they're going to weigh. The faster they weigh, the more they weigh, the faster they're going to fall. If you're fishing in really, really shallow water, you probably want to use something that weighs a lot because it's going to fall really fast. There's no point in that. Get something that falls a little bit slower. If you're fishing in really, really deep water, you're probably going to need something that weighs more, get it down to the bottom, and stays in contact with the bottom. Then you want to think about your hooks. What we just talked about here was a hook that is fused into a jig head. This one isn't. These are called offset hooks, wide gap hooks, and you can get some that are really small, or you can get some that are really big. It just depends on what type of bait you're going to use. If I'm going to use a great big old worm like this, I don't want to use a little bitty old hook like that because you're not giving that fish a big enough area to bite that worm. You want to use a bigger hook. So get a bigger hook for the type of bait you're going to use. Also, if I'm over in Eastern Kentucky, we already talked about the color. What do you think that worm's going to do in the water? It's not going to do anything. It's just going to kind of shimmy as it falls. Well, that's going to be looking very natural. That fish can see that from a long distance and they can key in on it. This worm has a great big old tail to it. You drag it through the water, that tail's going to kick, look all nice and pretty. That's going to put off vibrations. That'll probably work anywhere in the state, but you got to look at the color of that bait for the situation you're going to be in. Another way, if I'm a beginning fisherman and I want to get people hooked on fishing, I'm going to teach them to fish this way. That's with the top water. Top water baits run across the top of the water. And if you're out fishing and you're walking down a bank and you see some fish busting on the surface, here's some bigger hitting the surface, you're thinking, man, what's going on there? Well, that's fish eating other fish. They drive them up to the surface. You watch those cool shows on Discovery Channel, like, sharks eating seals. It's like the coolest thing ever. Well, that's kind of how bass are. They're coming up and they're crushing stuff on the surface. If it's at the surface, it can't go nowhere else. Well, if you run a bait across the surface, that fish is going to come up and hit it. When you see that fish come up and crush the surface, that's going to be the coolest thing you've ever seen in your entire life. If I were recommended a bait for you guys to use starting fishing, if you're going to fish a top water, probably going to be fishing from the bank, I get a buzz bait. These run across the surface. The blade turns kind of like the prop in an outboard, and all you got to do is reel it. That's it. This is like a walking bait. You also have some that pop. They do different actions on the water. This is one you have to impart a lot of action with your rod and your reel at the same time to get this bait to dart back and forth. A little bit more technical, a little bit harder to use. So if I were going to get started fishing, I'd get a buzz bait. Now you come over here, you have crankbaits. These are a perfect imitator of fish that your fish are wanting to eat. They range from different sizes. But there's also different tools on there you need to recognize for the situation you're going to fish in. This bait and this bait might look very similar, but there's one thing different. This one has the bill and this one does not. The bill on that bait is what allows that bait to dive down into the water. Typically, the shorter that bill is, it's not going to dive as deep. It's going to stay pretty shallow. The bigger the bill is, the longer it is, the deeper it's going to dive. If I'm fishing from the bank and I'm throwing my crankbait out and I'm reeling it in, you got to remember you're casting out to deep water and reeling to shallow. So if I'm casting bait out there and I'm reeling into deep water and I hit the bottom, I'm going to be flat on the bottom all the way up to me, and that's going to cause that bait to get hung up. You're probably going to lose it. So I'd use something that's going to stay very shallow if I'm fishing from the bank. You can get as technical as the types of bills that you have in that bait. We're not going to go too much detail with that, but you guys realize, look at the different lengths all these have. The longer it is, the deeper it's go. So this one's going to have well over 20 feet, and the one I showed first is probably going to only be able to go down to 3 foot. This one does not have a bill. Since it doesn't have a bill, you can throw it out, let it sink, and reel it back and try to keep it at a certain depth that you want to. But again, this is something you can get tangled up with very easily from the bank. But this is a wonderful bait to use as far as getting started. This is what you call a rattle trap. They weigh about a half an ounce, which is what most of your bass fishing baits are going to weigh. You can cast them as far, you can almost throw the line off your reel with these things. You can cast them super far. You just crank them in really fast. You don't usually hang these up as often as you do as a bait that's plowing down on the bottom. You can get your rod high and really fast to keep it right up at the surface. You can get your rod low real fast, get a little bit deeper. You can do a lot with these baits. As far as fishing from the bank, this is one I'd recommend. But as you notice, look at these hooks. You see 3 on each one. These are what you call treble hooks. This is just a single hook. That's a treble. So obviously which one has a chance to get hung more easily? This one does. You got to remember that if you're fishing from the bank. If I'm going to pick a crankbait to fish with from the bank, I want something that's going to swim shallow. I will pick one of these. These are what are known as square bill crankbaits. And the great thing about a square bill crankbait is a lot of them only going to dive down to about 4 or 5 feet or less. But also that nice square bill you see there, when this bait hits something, that's usually going to cause it to deflect off of it. It's not going to roll over it. It's going to deflect and go off to one side. You generally don't get hung up on trees and different objects as much with a square bill as you would with one of these with a rounder bill. So if I'm going to fish from the bank and I want to throw a square bill and I'm fishing around rocks, go for it, because you can bounce right off those rocks. Probably not going to get hung up too bad. If it does, just kind of walk to the side and pop it free. These will deflect. They don't get hung up as much. They mimic a shad very, very well. And if you guys are fishing any lake in this state, these are a great bait to get started with. Finally, you caught another fish, or you still struggling? You got one? All right. DJ just caught a fish. He's going to talk to you guys about this fish, how to remove it from the hook. And then I'm going to tell you guys my recommendations for what baits you need to get started with and kind of set up a budget, and then we'll get your questions. Go ahead, DJ.
Nice bluegill on our nice bobber rig. So, first thing you'll notice is that he doesn't want to be on this hook. And so what he's going to do is he's going to spike out his dorsal fin. And these, if you've ever been finned before, don't particularly feel good. So a lot of people were taught when they go to take one of these off the hook that just comb these down and you hold and then take the hook out. Well, if you do that and you for any reason let go, he starts to flop a little bit, he's going to stick those fins back up and it's going to hit you right in the hand multiple times. So what we recommend is, if you'll see on him, got these nice little dots, all right? A lot of people call these ears. Well, fish don't have traditional ears like we do, but they're basically where their ears are, so we call them ears. So what you'll do is from the belly side, take him and put your fingers right on those dots, all right? Get a good grip of him, and then we can remove the hook.
I think we got you guys. Hey. So if you want to, before you get back in it real quick, one of the things we were just talking about was they were asking about if they were just starting out, which reel would you recommend? And I was suggesting that first one you showed them, would you have something different you'd tell them?
Right. Either a spin cast, the closed face, or something like this, a spinning reel. Those would be the easiest ones to get into. All right. We'll get questions in just a second, but I want to show you this rig that I was using to catch that fish. Country showed you a bunch of artificial lures, and they're made to imitate something that a fish would normally eat. You want to feed the fish what he wants to eat. That's going to cause you to catch more and more fish. Well, today we've got this bobber rig, one little bobber and a hook, and you put your bait on the hook. Well, when I first got down here to the dock here at Camp Curry today, I'll notice that you can see it before it flies away. We had a nice hatch of willow flies, all right? So what do you think the fish are eating? They're probably eating these willow flies. So you can go ahead and take one of these guys by the wings. They're not going to bite you at all. You can take him and you can line that hook with him. But you don't want to put him all the way up on the shank, okay? You want to cover him with that hook point. That hook point's right here. You want the hook point hidden from the fish. So when he goes to bite, he bites right where you can actually hook him. All right, I'm going to let him go and be fish food somewhere else. But if you do have some worms, like we have these mealworms are just about perfect hook size. You can line him up somewhere and just hook him in the middle and line him all the way through. But you want most of the worm to be on the hook. If you have too much hanging off, all that fish is going to do is bite this little head off and pull the rest of them off. So you want to make sure put as much of the worm on the hook as possible. A lot of kids, when they come to camp for the first time, we got night crawlers that are this long, all right? Don't put the whole night crawler on a little bitty hook, okay? Just pinch a little piece off, put about that much on. So now that we've discussed how to catch some fish, discuss your tackle box, we discussed what rod you should have for the first time, me and Country are going to answer some questions. So any questions y'all can come up with in the chat, we're going to try to answer them here. We're not experts, but we're pretty close. Pretty good. What you got, Nancy?
All right, DJ, somebody sent me in a private message. They want to know, you all have talked about it, or he was talking about with the baits, can fish actually hear?
Fish cannot hear, but they pick up on vibrations just like our ears pick up on vibrations. The only reason we can hear is because sound waves vibrate the little bones in our ears and help us to hear. Fish have what's running down the center of each side. They're called lateral lines, and they pick up on vibrations. And they're really, really sensitive. Even a little bug on top of the water vibrating, they can feel that. When Country showed you those crankbaits and he's pulling them through the water, those are putting off vibrations. So even if the water is like chocolate milk, fish can still feed. They get hungry, they can still find food. All right, anything else?
So what about using things like crickets and mealworms and things like that?
Well,
Bait.
fish like to eat bugs. Every single fish, when they start out, they hatch out of an egg. All these fish hatch out of eggs. And as they get bigger, they eat bigger and bigger things. So a fish, when it's really, really small, even a bass, when it's really, really small, it's going to start off eating bugs first. It's going to eat little insects in the water, little worms, little leeches. And as it gets bigger and bigger, it's going to start to eat bigger and bigger things. So yeah, when you're using crickets and mealworms and stuff like that, yeah, you're typically going to catch smaller fish. Move up to bass fishing, you're using bigger, larger lures, you're going to catch bigger and bigger fish.
What would you use, or what would you suggest if I wanted to catch a catfish? What kind of bait and rod would I use?
All right, catfish have a great sense of smell. Okay, they smell lots of things in the water. So usually when you catfish, use bigger hooks because these are usually bigger fish. And you're going to use baits that smell sometimes really bad. You can catch them on night crawlers, you can catch them on hot dogs, but usually when you catfish, the smellier the bait, usually the more it's going to benefit you. You're going to catch more catfish that way.
Also, Jackson's pretty smart here. He's asking, will a weedless frog or a Texas rig be as effective on a spinning rod?
Say that again?
So Jackson wants to know, would a weedless frog or a Texas rig be as effective on a spinning rod?
Okay, for that, we're going to send it to our own Timmy Horton over here, Country.
Funny you should ask about that. I don't know what your name was, so I'll say Bobby. He was asking who?
Jackson.
Jackson. That's where Johnny Cash sang. He's going to Jacksontown. This is a frog. Frogs swim on the top of the water. Bass love to destroy them. As far as a spinning rod goes, I would probably never fish with a frog on a spinning rod and reel. A lot of times we use spinning rods, just got like great big surf rods down there in the ocean. Typically what we use here, they're going to be a little bit of a lighter action. You see, these are really big hooks, all right? And that fish comes up and bites this bait will collapse. Then you got to drive 2 Mongo hooks into the mouth of that fish. If you got a rod that's really whippy, got really light line, it's never going to get the job done. So the bait casting rod, the heavier the line you got, the more power you're going to have. I would use that on your bait casting rods. As far as a Texas rig, what he was asking, that is what you would see here. You get this hook. That is where you will slide your bullet sinker up the line and tie the line on it. It's going to look like this. And you're going to be dragging this across the bottom with your worm here. So that's what they call the Texas rig. Drag that across the bottom. If you're using a spinning rod and reel, you can fish Texas rigs on there, but you're probably going to have a hard time driving a hook this size or that size into the mouth of that fish with that spinning rod, because remember, it's usually going to have a less powerful action than some of your bait casting rods. So if I was going to use a spinning rod, I probably wouldn't use a frog because you probably don't have enough power to drive those hooks into the mouth of that fish. If you're going to use a Texas rig, it needs to be lighter, 1/16 of an ounce, 1/18 of an ounce, something like that. Small hook. You don't want to use these great big 1 ounce sinkers and these great big 7, 8, 12 aught hooks, whatever. because you're going to have enough power to drive that hook into the mouth of that fish. Hope that helped you.
And here's another one in private message, and this may be somebody from Western Kentucky. The reason I say that is because they're asking about snagging, and they're talking about below the dam. Have you ever done that? And what kind of fish would you catch if you did that?
All right, so down below some of our bigger dams, there is a season, and you'll have to look in our regulation book. You can find that at fw.ky.gov. But there are snagging seasons. And basically all you do when you snag is usually use a really, really big hook or a treble hook and a weight. There is no bait whatsoever on it. You throw it out there, you let it sink a little bit, and you basically just jerk and reel and jerk and reel. And basically you're going to catch anything that hook runs into. A lot of times when they're doing it, they're below the dam. They can catch spoonbills. They can catch catfish. Occasionally you can snag a stripe or a gar, or if you're below any of our major rivers and reservoirs, you're going to catch some Asian carp probably. And when you hook a fish in the mouth, it puts up a good fight. But when you're snagging, you're not necessarily aiming for the mouth. You catch a fish in the side, you might fight a fish that's only a foot long in current. You might be there for 30 minutes just trying to get him in. So snagging can be fun, but it's typically not what you're going to do in most lakes, in most fishing situations.
All right, got another private message one. Do you guys, Caitlin, you back? Are you there? Oh, or did we lose you guys again? Oh, it looks like we lost them again. The hot weather is crazy on our phones down there, guys. Sorry about that. So while they're trying to get connected back up, give them a few minutes to do that. So yeah, some of the private messages you all are sending me about some of the technical fishing stuff, I'm going to have to wait for those guys to get back because DJ and Country love the fish and they do all kinds of different kind of fishing. So they're going to be way better at telling you some details than I am. Can you use minnows and then work up catching bluegill and stuff? Yep, you can, but you just got to remember one of the things with catching those little fish is their mouths are not very big. So you can't use something bigger, too big that they can't get in their mouth, or it's gonna be harder to get in their mouth. So sometimes with like bluegills, like what I like to use, like I fish for bluegill or crappie, red ear, sometimes I'll just like use these little bitty jigs, not very big because their mouth's not very big, so you can't use a very big hook. And then maybe a mealworm or sometimes a smaller minnow. Because again, you got to think about what you're trying to catch and trying to mix that up and match it up with what those animals, what those fish may eat anyway. While they're trying to get connected back up here, I'll take a chance here and kind of fill you all in. So we got one more Zoom coming up next week, a new one, although on Thursday, if you all missed us last week, we went to Camp Webb and they showed us some of the things that biologists use to learn some of the things they learn about. Like, so they showed us a rocket net. They showed us some of the different tracking devices, some of the different things our biologists will use when they're finding out about the animals. Because a lot of times we get asked, how do we know what we know? And these are some of the tools our biologists use. So if you didn't get a chance to watch that with us last week, the Camp Webb crew, they're gonna offer another Zoom this Thursday. So the link or the email I sent out to you all last week has that link in it, and it's gonna be on Thursday at 1 o'clock or 1 o'clock Western Daylight Time, Central Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Time. So if you didn't get a chance to watch that and you want to kind of get an idea of what biologists do and how they learn what they do, we're going to offer another one of those on Thursday for some of you who didn't get a chance to hang out with us then. And then next week, next Tuesday, is going to be our last Zoom. It's going to be end of the summer here, so we're down to the wire. But that last Zoom, we're going to go back to Camp Wallace. Some of you guys know that camp. And the Wallace crew, they're promising to try to show us a few live critters. So they're going to talk more about wildlife ID and some of the animals we may find around Kentucky, and hopefully maybe find a few that they can actually show us there that they find in camp. So that's another one. I'll send that link out tomorrow for next Tuesday. If you are doing our Camp In video, or our Camp In virtual patches, big thing coming up. Guys, the deadline was extended, but this Friday is it. So if you haven't had a chance to finish out your virtual camp and earn your real virtual patch, you got a few more days here to try to get that stuff into us. And I think we got Kayla and them back up, maybe, if I can find them again here. So you got a few more days, got to get that stuff in by Friday. So if you're trying to do those patches, or if you are wanting to do a talent show, you got that coming up here. You got a few more days you can do that. Let me get these guys back in and get them unmuted. Hey, Kaylin, you guys back?
Yes.
All right. So got a few more questions while you guys are gone. They were thinking a little bit. Can a big mouth fish move if you hold its mouth? So I guess they're trying to figure out how to hold that fish and not get finned.
All right, so if you don't want to get finned and the fish is big enough, sure. Well, a lot of people that bass fish, they take their thumb, put it in the fish's mouth, and flip it. All right, just like you're holding a cup that way. The only problem you have to watch out for is if it's a really big fish, like a catfish. Sometimes the catfish and the bass, they don't have teeth, but they do have these real heavy bumps on them. It's kind of like sandpaper. So if a big fish and it takes a lot of strength for you to hold him, and he's pushing back and forth, it's going to scratch up the insides of your hand. A lot of fish that are bigger than your hands, yeah, you will have to lift.
All right. Can you use a minnow, then work up on catching a bass or catch? Let me see if I can read that again. Can you use a minnow, then work up on catching a bluegill and then a bass?
If you're bluegill fishing, particularly, you're not going to use a minnow because their mouths aren't that big. Fish can, like a bluegill, can try to eat a minnow, but it's going to take a lot of effort. If you're bluegill fishing, you're probably going to use things like millworms, night crawlers, crickets, stuff like that. If you're bass fishing, yeah, bass will eat a minnow, but there's probably easier ways like those artificial lures where you can work them a lot faster. And artificial lures for bass tend to be more productive. If you're crappie fishing, crappie love minnows, all right? So if you're crappie fishing, minnows would work great. Probably wouldn't want to use crickets if you're trying to target them. Just depends on what you're fishing for and how big their mouth is.
So for snagging, what happens if we catch something other than a fish?
What else would you catch? Say a turtle, maybe?
Maybe.
Catch a turtle, you'd have to release him. Probably because a turtle is covered in a really thick shell, you're probably going to have a very low chance of snagging one of them.
I think they're worried about catching a snake doing that.
No, you're not going to catch a snake doing that. It'd be really unlucky for the snake if you caught one.
I don't think I've ever seen it happen.
Yeah.
So question is, what about bow fishing?
Bow fishing? We have
you
seasons for that. If you're bow fishing, you do have to fish in areas that it's allowed to happen. Most of your lakes and rivers, it's perfectly fine, but you have to target fish that are considered rough fish. So things like gar and carp, those would be rough fish that most people would be out bow fishing for. It is illegal to go after a sport fish like a bass or a catfish with a bow fishing rig.
Yeah, and if you aren't familiar with that, bow fishing is a bow and arrow. That's what they use.
Yeah, literally a bow and arrow
Yep.
is specifically made to shoot and reel in fish.
And Sierra, I don't know about you, girl. She wants to know how to catch a water snake.
How to catch a water snake? If I was going to try to catch a water snake, I would probably go to somewhere where there's water, some places for them to hide, flip over a few rocks. I will recommend, though, that you figure out what kind of snake it is before grabbing any type of snake. So starting out, I wouldn't recommend doing that.
Yeah, there are a few venomous ones out there, guys.
Right. There are some that can hurt you around the water.
So Country said earlier about fish seeing colors, and they thought they only saw in black and white. So can they see every color or just a few colors?
Fish can see every color. They can see every color. Fish, when they're mating, when they're pairing up, the males are going to be very brightly colored, and that's how they attract female, just similar to birds. So they can see color very well.
And I was telling them earlier while you guys were getting hooked back up that one way to learn maybe how to use the casting rods is those casting plugs we use. And somebody's asking if we can, if you have that still laying there, they can see what it looks like.
I don't have any here right this second, but a good alternative if they are trying to learn how to cast is either a cork with a weight, or if you grab a crankbait and take the treble hooks off, you can go in your backyard and practice casting all day long, and that's not going to get hooked up if you take the hooks off. So that's the way I would recommend somebody getting into a bait caster. Go out into your backyard and just play with it, all right? Just get used to putting your thumb on there and slowing that spool down.
Yeah, I was telling them how I learned to use one by casting a hula hoop or an old tire laying in the yard. All right,
Yep, just something to aim at.
questions I may have missed because there was a few different ones coming in private message and different ones popping up. Don't let me miss any. I'm not meaning to. If I've missed something you've asked, ask me again. Okay. Jackson likes to use, let's see, a 6x6 medium heavy for Texas rigs and a 7'3" heavy for frogs topwater. Jackson must like to fish.
Good, man. I would recommend, instead of your 6.6, you probably move it up to a 7 or a little longer rod. Stiffer, heavier, the better if you're frogging.
See, the rest of us are shaking our heads now, right now, going, what are y'all talking about?
He's talking about how long the rod is. So he was using a 6.5 foot medium heavy rod.
Yep.
Heavy is this. So this thicker, stiffer rod would be a heavy action. This little spinning rod is really, really flimsy. It's a light action. So that's what he was talking about.
All right, guys. Any other questions we may have missed? Are you all thinking of? Is everybody ready to go out and catch a fish? Hopefully. All right. Looks like we got about all of them, unless you all have a few more. We are running about our hour there. We try to keep it at, guys. Any other questions before we let these guys get back to their fishing? Because I'm sure that's what they're going to do for a little bit now. All right, so again, just a couple of those reminders we were talking about just a second ago is that if you are still trying to figure out, finish up your virtual camp stuff, don't forget this Friday is our deadline. So try to get all your stuff sent in if you're trying to earn all your patches and get the real patch mailed to you. And if you're trying to do the talent show, there's prizes, and I can tell you there's we don't have too many entries yet, so you got a pretty good chance. So if you've been thinking about that and wanting to do it, you might want to try to get that pulled off and get that sent in, because that Friday is our deadline, all right? We've got 2 more Zooms. We got one on Thursday, which will be the biologist one that we did last week. We're going to try to do that again with you guys for those who missed out on us. And then next week, we'll be back at Camp Wallace. And one more DJ for you guys down there. Sierra wants to know, how do you identify a bluegill?
All right, so you identify a bluegill. You have a bluegill spray. All right, so a bluegill gets its name from having a nice bluegill. And this bait is made to look like one. So it's got that nice bluegill. A lot of times you're going to see these tiger stripes on it. It's going to be small. It's going to be fat as long as they are fat. So usually no bigger than the size of your hand. There's another one that imitates a bluegill. A lot of times the males will have that bright orange belly too. All right.
All right. I think we
Anything else?
think we
Good deal.
got it. I think we got all the questions. A couple of resources. Somebody asked me in the private message stuff, if you want some other resources, if you get on our Kentucky Fish and Life webpage, and again, that's at fw.ky.gov, we have a pretty cool ID book on there. So if you're catching something or you've caught something before, you're not really sure what it was, you can maybe thumb through that book or look at it online and get an idea of what it is. The fishing guide's on there. So if you're trying to figure out what the rules are, what the regulations are on the water that you live near, you probably want to check that out. And there's also a really cool book on there that you can download or look at online and kind of teach you some of the basics of fishing. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that, that's something else you can look at. Somebody was asking me for more resources, and there's a ton of stuff on our website, and that's just 3 right off the top of my head I'm thinking about. So hopefully we'll see some of you all on Thursday, if we missed you last week on our biologist Zoom. And if not, Thursday, hopefully we'll see many of you all back next Tuesday for our very last Zoom for the summer, and look forward to seeing some of your all's camp-in submissions. And we'll talk to you soon, guys. Thank you all much. Y'all have a great afternoon.